Let's look at the economy now and the possibility that the RBA might look at some monetary stimulus beyond the traditional cash rate movements. Let's go to John Kehoe, senior writer at the AFR. What are we talking about here? Is it what they call, what's the term?
Quantitative easing,
that's it,
money
quantitative
printing,
easing.
yeah. So interest.
They're going to do that?
Possibly. It's plausible they do it maybe second half of next year. Definitely not a done deal. Depends where the economy heads, depends if fiscal policy steps up and plays a bigger role.
But he's giving a speech, the RBA says, and you've written about this in the AFR today, talking about unconventional monetary policy lessons from overseas.
Yeah, so this is really, in 2 weeks' time, laying the groundwork, I think, to prepare the financial markets and the Australian public psyche for the possibility of unconventional policy from the RBA, such as buying government bonds to drive down long-term borrowing rates across the economy. So it's a pretty interesting development. I think the RBA's message will still be that we don't think this...
We've got pictures of Joe Hockey. The reason those pictures popped up for our viewers, we'll get to that story in a moment, but first of all on the RBA, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, so basically Lowe, I think, wants to lay the groundwork to prepare everyone that this is a plausibility, it might happen, rather than just thrusting it upon people potentially next year if it does happen. Now, it's not the central case of the central bank, but you'd have to say the cash rate's only 0.75%. They've probably only got one, at best 2 cuts left in them if they need to go lower before they run out of room.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to start.
So do you think possibly they leave it where it is, the cash rate, and start doing this other unconventional approach?
I think they'd at least do one more cash rate cut, and markets are pricing that in for around about March next year, about a 50% chance, maybe even February. Market economists are talking about as well. I think they'd probably do that cut, and then after that reassess and see where things are at maybe in the middle of the year.
So what are some of the lessons from quantitative easing internationally, or as he calls it, Dr. Lowe, the unconventional monetary policy?
Probably the biggest one for mine is that these policies have proven impossible to unwind. So we've seen the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, Europe go down this path of buying sort of securities and financial markets, particularly government bonds, but other private sector assets too.
But haven't backed
No one's been able to get out of it. Now, the US started to withdraw from it, but they've run into problems lately, and they've had to actually go to what's being dubbed QE4. Now, Jay Powell, the Fed, debates whether it really is QE, but they are back in the markets again, buying some of these shorter dated securities. It's really difficult to get out of. So that sort of does pose the question, do we really want the Central Bank of Australia going down this sort of extreme path, or are there other policies from the arms of government that should be stepping in before QE?
Now, back to the hockey story that we saw him and his wife there in Washington, D.C. A lot of praise for his role as ambassador. I know he's got his critics, but he's very close to the Trump administration and Mulvaney and others, quite senior people in that Trump administration. And he's also had an impact over his time there in terms of some of their economic policy on asset recycling and things like that through his experience as treasurer. And now he wants to turn that into a private sector job, is that right?
Potentially, yeah. Now, my colleague Jacob Grieber is reporting today that hockey's going to stay around in the US next year after his ambassadorship ends in January, and he's really on the hunt for a private sector job, potentially in infrastructure, maybe helping source Australian funds to get into helping build American infrastructure, or teaching the Americans about the Australian experience. Because, I mean, let's face it, as he said, and I know from my 5 years there, the American infrastructure over there, it is lightning years or decades behind in many areas in countries like Australia and other developed countries too. So they really...
So there's some low-hanging fruit he thinks he can advise on?
Yeah, he feels that way. I know for some time he's been keen to sort of maybe potentially stay on. Jacob's now reporting that he will. He's also going to do a part-time lecturing role at American University on politics. That'll very much be a part-time thing. I think he really needs to land a big job because it's expensive to live in the US. His kids go to an expensive private school. Now, when that's not partially being subsidised by DFAT, you need to land a big job. I mean, I think he'd have something to offer. Yeah. And, you know, his CV over there, former finance minister, ambassador, that goes a long way.
Plus the Trump connections.
The connections to the Trump White House.
And it's an unconventional White House, as we all know. This is, and you spent a number of years there up until recently, so you know the lay of the land. This is, and Arthur Sinodinos, obviously, well-credentialed going there, but you have to be nimble, don't you, in that particular administration in terms of working with them?
Absolutely. And I think the reason why hockey was successful in making inroads is because he wasn't a traditional diplomatic who might have gone through the traditional courses to...
Played a bit of golf.
Yeah, played golf, went along to the sort of social events, almost acted like a politician. I mean, I think he saw himself over there as still a bit of a politician rather than a traditional diplomat.